Dr. Jerry BODEKAR is a renowned person in the field of traditional and complementary medicine. He researches and advises on international public policy. He was trained at Harvard, and he is a senior faculty member in public health at the University of Oxford Medical School, and he is adjunct professor of epidemiology at the Columbia University in New York. He has been chair of the Commonwealth Working Group on Traditional, Complementary and Alternative Medicine, and has done work on traditional medicinal policy and medicinal plant conservation for a number of renowned United Nations agencies. He is also working in Asia on refugee health care and traditional medicinal use. He is also the founding editor of the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine, the international editor of the Journal of Tropical Medical Plants, and editor-in-chief of one of the most prestigious projects of the World Health Organization, which is the Global Atlas on Traditional, Complementary and Alternative Medicine, published in Geneva. And I would be happy to have, as you all would share with me, the wisdom that he has and the ease with which he transmits that wisdom to us as fellow practitioners in the field of Ayurvedic medicine. Dr. BODEKAR.
Ladies and gentlemen,
please.
good morning. It's a great pleasure to see you all here, bright, awake, and receptive. Thank you very much for coming. And you are a picture of Ayurvedic well-being as we look at you beaming from here. Bird's eye view of what's happening in traditional and complementary medicine around the world. And the medium to dark green colors show medium to widespread use of traditional and complementary medicine. And as you can see, this is a pretty green world. The areas that are white are areas where, despite going back and back, we couldn't get any more data, and the areas that are very, very light mean that there was quite low data, but probably from what we had, some indicator of use. What you see is this is a global phenomenon. That's basically the point. Most people in most countries are using some form of complementary or traditional medicine. The public have already made these various approaches that we put together as traditional and complementary medicine their integrated healthcare strategy and choice. Now, looking at a few different modalities, chiropractic, which began in America, has, as you can see from the light green and the dark green, begun to spread globally. Chiropractic is really now a global natural healthcare system. If you look at acupuncture, which started on the other side of the map in China when President Nixon put his back out on a visit to China and was given an acupuncturist rather than a painkiller, this stimulated an interest in acupuncture, and an acupuncturist came from China to the National Institutes of Health. Well, in those 30 or so years, 35 years, acupuncture has become globalized. It is part of global healthcare. Well, there's the financial question of who pays, and although there is an emerging trend of private insurers covering complementary and traditional medicine, certainly in the industrialized countries, and some government expenditure in Britain, 10% of complementary therapies are use of complementary therapies is covered by the National Health Service. But mostly, 90% or more is paid out of pocket by the public. So this is something the public not only wants, but are willing to pay for. At the same time, governments are beginning to recognize these different approaches. And what you see is, here's a map for legal recognition. The yellow suggests legal doesn't necessarily mean comprehensive. For instance, you see in the US it's state by state, but there's sufficient recognition across the states to create a national picture of recognition, the same in Australia and so on. You can see that although the legal recognition, the yellow, is not as great as the green we saw for use, it's still pretty widespread. Now this is Chinese medicine and acupuncture. This is Ayurveda. The legal recognition is the yellow. Let me go back to the Chinese. Ayurveda. Chinese, Ayurveda. I think you get the point, without my having to dwell on it too much, that Chinese medicine is far more widely officially recognized. I'm not saying widely used, although that may be the case, but more widely officially recognized than Ayurveda is. And that is the point of this panel today. I'd like to just look at this. This is just to say we're pulling all these public health and policy perspectives into a book which should be out in a few weeks with Imperial College Press, drawing on a lot of the data that was too much to put in the Global Atlas. These maps again. Now, I'd just like to draw some attention to some of the differences here between China and India. There are standardized bodies, professional bodies for acupuncture, standard curricula, regulatory boards for acupuncture in all of these countries. There are also World Health Organization guidelines for correct practice of acupuncture and for research into acupuncture. There are also WHO standards for safety and evaluation of Chinese herbal medicine. The World Health Organization, as you know, is a United Nations organization, and it's made up of member states. And the member states, when they're looking to incorporate something new into their country, will take guidance from the World Health Organization. So if there are guidelines that have been approved through WHO, it makes it much easier for a country to say, oh, there are WHO guidelines, well, let's start with those. Now, there are, as you see, guidelines on traditional Chinese medicine, but nothing on Ayurveda. China has been very active in promoting this within the World Health Organization. This is in no way, and in no way could it ever be, a criticism of China. This is all praise to China, all power to China for understanding how to do this and achieving their goal. Now, I think to understand where Ayurveda should go, it is simply instructive to look at where China has gone. These are a list of the World Health Organization collaborating centers in traditional medicine. WHO has a system of assigning very distinguished recognition to leading research and clinical institutes around the world in different areas. It can be in immunology, it can be in cancer, and so on. And in the field of traditional medicine, WHO has lent its name to a series of traditional medicine centers around the world. Now you can see those centers there, and 6 of them are in China. One of them on Chinese medicine is in Australia, in Melbourne, at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. You also see that there's one in Vietnam. Vietnamese medicine comes purely from Chinese medicine. The Vietnamese Toc Nam, Toc Bac means medicine of the north, medicine of the south. The medicine of the south is the herbal ingredients of Vietnam. The Toc Bac, the medicine of the north, is the medicine of China, which is the theoretical framework for Vietnamese medicine. It is Chinese medicine with Vietnamese materia medica. There is an institute of traditional medicine with WHO status in Vietnam. There are 3 in Korea. There are 2 in South Korea and 1 in North Korea. Oriental medicine of Korea is also based on Chinese medicine. There are 2 in Japan. Japanese medicine is referred to, as many of you will know, as Kampo medicine. Kampo is the Japanese word for Chinese. There are 2 collaborating centers, WHO collaborating centers on Kampo medicine. So what you see in Asia, these are the WHO collaborating centers on traditional medicine. They are all either on Chinese medicine or on Chinese medicine-derived systems of traditional medicine. That's the list of it. Now, sadly, there are no World Health Organization collaborating centers on any of the Indian systems of medicine, and with reference to this Congress, on Ayurveda. How has this come about? What has China done to promote its traditions so effectively on the world stage? For more than a decade, as you see, China has had effectively a sub-ministry of traditional medicine within the Ministry of Health, and this has 10 departments. You can see some of the departments there. They include licensure, research, product standards, education, and there is an international department in this traditional medicine sub-ministry, and there is also a trade department, international department and trade department. The job of both of those departments is to focus outside China. They do not focus on China. They focus on the rest of the world. Now this, I think, has been structured into China's thinking and planning for such a long time and so systematically that China has been able to achieve these great successes. India needs to learn from this experience. China has also supported research and development in many countries. It pays for its young researchers to go and work. It gives them bursaries and scholarships to work in other countries, supports them. We've had them in Oxford, coming to the dermatology department at Oxford, working in the Oxford Wound Healing Institute, no money needed from Oxford, no money needed from Britain, fully funded to do research on traditional Chinese plants and wound healing. I was in Melbourne about 8 or 10 weeks ago, and I had the chance to meet with Professor Charlie Zhui, some of you may know, who's the director of the very new WHO Collaborating Centre on Chinese Medicine in Melbourne, in Australia, at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. And Professor Zhui said to me, just by chance, he said, look, if you'd like to write a couple of books on Chinese medicine, the Chinese government is putting out billions of yuan to support publications on Chinese medicine, and they have contracts with Elsevier Press in Shanghai. Now, The Lancet is published by Elsevier. That gives you a sense of how prestigious Elsevier Press is. The Chinese government has negotiated a contract, open-ended number of contracts with Elsevier Shanghai to publish books on Chinese medicine. The collaborating centers are asking people, I just happen to be in the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, and Professor Zhui said to me, would you like to write a couple of books on Chinese medicine? We've got the money. Now, I've never had anybody ask me to write a book and offer me money before, but there's money. This is Chinese money. I said, I'm sorry, but I have 2 contracts with Elsevier in Oxford for 2 books that I have to start in January. I can't do it, but others will. Now, this is China writing the check. I should tell you, for the WHO guidelines on acupuncture and on herbal medicine, China hosted the meetings. They were in Hong Kong, they were in Guangzhou, and everybody who came in from other countries came in on a business class ticket on Cathay Pacific. They were put up at 5-star hotels. They got an honorarium. Who wrote the check? The People's Republic of China, not the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization sponsored this. China paid. Now, India has to learn this and understand this, that there is no free ride to globalization at this point. Globalization has been supported by the private sector, by many of the good people here who have done work individually or through their organizations, by the Ayurvedic drug companies and so on. This has led to a certain level of development, but it is now patchy. It is not comprehensive, and the gaps need to be recognized and addressed by means of an overarching strategy of where India wants to go with this, not where America or Britain or Australia or Malaysia or United Arab Emirates, the various other countries, Germany and so on, want to go with this, but where India wants to see this go. That's where China began, with these different departments, trade and international, not looking at China at all, looking at the world for China. Basically, I don't want to take too much time, but to illustrate the point, and every high street, in those of you who know America know that in every small town in America, the main street's called Main Street. In Britain, every little village, every little town, the main street is called High Street. And on every tiny little high street in tiny little villages in Britain, you can find a Chinese herbalist. How do they get there? The Department of Trade in the Chinese Sub-Ministry of Traditional Medicine in Beijing. This is not an accident. They are there because they are supported by their government. The herbs come through their government. The visas are arranged through their government. They are the distributors, they are the trade ambassadors for this huge foreign exchange earner for China. Right? They are there. In Africa, one of my colleagues at Oxford, who is Chinese, Dr. Elizabeth Xu, who's reader in medical anthropology at Oxford, has been studying Chinese medicine in Africa. The same thing is present in Africa. That in all of the major cities there are Chinese medicine centers, often linked to the Chinese embassy. They are distributing, they are treating the affluent, the elite, the diplomatic community, the politicians, the business community, and so on, with Chinese medicine. You've seen the big conference in China just recently, hosting a big congress for Africa. China's strategizing a strong partnership between China and Africa, and traditional medicine is part of it. This has not been led by Chinese companies privately going and setting up a shop in Africa. This has been centrally planned and supported. So basically, Chinese medicine is far ahead of the Indian medical systems in terms of globalization, and this, I think you'll all agree, is a cultural and an economic loss for India. Less access to Ayurveda is a healthcare loss for the world. These are some of the things that we see. There is no standard Ayurveda curriculum, and everybody's calling for it. There are restrictions on Ayurvedic herbs. There's no formal licensure of Ayurvedic practitioners outside of the subcontinent, no WHO guidelines on any aspect of Ayurvedic practice or research. So what is needed? A commitment by the government of India, and not just the government of India, leading Ayurvedic bodies to support the globalization in a number of different ways. One of these is through the development of a WHO presence, WHO guidelines in some of the following areas: curriculum, clinical practice, standards of herbal preparations, panchakarma, yoga instruction. Dr. Mashelka, who opened the session on Friday, said to me a couple of years ago in Britain at a British Academy meeting, he said on the sidelines of the meeting, he said, "Did you know that there are patents being granted in America on yoga positions?" He said, "Soon it'll be a situation where it'll be illegal for people to teach yoga, certain yoga positions in India, because the patent on this position is held by Americans." What to do? Well, now, this is not just America, this is happening around the world. Why? It's because India hasn't had an international globalization outlooking strategy to claim this knowledge for itself. So national and regional Ayurveda associations are needed, and I'd like to just note that a very important meeting coordinated by Dr. Doifoide, from the Dean of the Department of Ayurveda in Pune, and Dr. Vasuji from Vignan Bharati here last night was held, and out of that came two very important initiatives. One, the beginnings of the establishment of an international working group on Ayurveda, the first ever. This is very great news. This conference is indeed turning out to be the landmark event it promised to be. And the second was the establishment, after that panel, of a European working group on Ayurveda. I'm very happy to announce that as well, and members of this panel are a part of that. So knowledge generation is needed. You heard what I said about China putting billions of yuan and negotiating contracts with Elsevier to make sure that this all happens. They're not just waiting, they're not just saying, oh, you should do it. They're doing it, they're organizing it, taking a lead. So India has to do the same sort of thing. And I think in this Congress, if we don't make this Congress the turning point that it ought to be, then are we going to wait for the 12th five-year plan or the 15th five-year plan and disappoint the world that is waiting for this great knowledge? So this panel, I've told you what the goals are, and I'd just like to close by saying, why does this matter? Because Ayurvedic globalization is summed up in Sanskrit as Vasudev Kutumbakam. The world is our family. This is Ayurvedic globalization, and this is why we must be serious in making this great knowledge available to the world. Thank you very much.